Welcome back, welcome back.
Royalty. Yeah.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. For those who don't know me, my name is Tiara. Thank you for watching. Here we dabble in makeup from here and there, but also talk about film and TV shows and nerd about that type of stuff. So if you like that, then make sure to keep on watching. With the success of Jordan Peele's debut of Get Out and creating a new subgenre of horror, even more content like Black Mirror and Us, Antebellum is definitely trying to go in this route. Antebellum is directed by Gerald Nush and Christopher Renz. The film premiered on Amazon Prime. It's a part of the movie theater feature films. The pitch that I feel was given for this film was, what if a Black American woman wakes up one morning and finds herself on a Civil War plantation? And that's what happens to the character in this film named Eden, who is played by Janelle Monáe. The actual premise of this film is very vague in a sense. I mean, even the trailer was very vague. A successful author, Veronica Henley, finds herself trapped in a horrifying reality that forces her to confront the past, present, and future before it's too late. What were we supposed to get from that premise? I didn't understand anything that happened in the trailer. It was rumored before, when the film first was brought up, that it was going to be an adaptation of Kindred. For those who don't know what the novel Kindred was about, it's developed by Octavia Butler in 1979, and Antebellum, I would say, is definitely influenced by that. In which the plot of Kindred is a Black American woman had the ability to teleport back in a time that was chattel slavery. She lived through her ancestors. I wouldn't compare the two because Antebellum's plot is less complex than what Kindred developed. I would put Antebellum in the generic horror category because when I look at films like The Circle or Haunt and things in that nature, I see that as being more so of general horror, where I feel that Kindred is more of like it's more so of like a sci-fi futuristic horror. So I wouldn't put the two in the same category, although I could see how people could make those connections. There's a lot of points I want to make today, and we're just going to dive down into what this film was really all about and why did it have so much criticism, because I saw so many people saying that they hated it. I think people had a different expectation for it. So if you're going to watch this film and you think it's going to be Kindred and you love that novel, don't go into watching it and trying to compare instantly. I don't recommend that. Just have an open mind, watch on your own, and then have your thoughts on it. The first act starts out with a quote, and it says, "The past is never dead, it's not even past," by William Faulkner. And this film is set on a plantation where we are introduced to Eden, who is played by Janelle Monáe, and she had been knocked out and put on a horse accompanied by Confederate soldiers. When I initially watched this, a lot of things I was immediately able to point out that just wasn't fitting in my mind with the correct era of when slavery happened. Thinking in this era about the aesthetic wise, like how things should look. So for instance, at the very beginning, we are presented with this plantation, and there are a lot of Confederate soldiers on this plantation. It's one big house. There's a young white girl in a yellow dress. She's just picking yellow daisies, living her life, and she's running up to this woman on the steps of the house who seemingly is her mother in a red dress that welcomes her. Now, we do see a lot of slaves, and we come across Eden. She's been knocked out and put on a horse and accompanied by Confederate soldiers, and then the camera pans over to this Black couple that the Confederate soldiers have captured. And the man, whose name is Eli, I don't know if that was necessarily his girlfriend or they were just trying to escape together, but it pans over to the woman who says she's sorry, and she holds her necklace and she runs away. And she's in this like beautiful, I really love the colors that this film, like aesthetic wise, the sceneries, I mean, it's not a great situation they're in, but the colors were very vibrant. That gave me very much so of like Midsummer aesthetic, because it's one of those horror films where everything is so bright in the day and it's monstrous acts happening during the day, and that's not a general thing that happens with horror films. Going back to the couple, so the woman it pans to who runs away, she's in this beautiful like turquoise dress, and I pointed out that she had a septum in her nose, and Knowing with obviously in African culture that is, you know, they have septums, but back then it wasn't the more modern day septum with small ring. It was more so of a larger ring that cultures used to wear. The woman runs away, and the Confederate soldiers, one of them being named Jasper, he ends up throwing a rope, which was a noose, and it goes around her neck, and he pulls her, and she just begs him to kill her, and then he replies he will accommodate her request, and then shoots her point blank. But a lot of things start going violent. Eli was knocked out with a rifle, and then he also has one of those contraptions around his head, and Eden is now put into a cabin, and she's being questioned by the general, which is funny because I know Eric Lane, he was in Victorious, and he sure played a whole different character, because I know he played that teacher in Victorious, which was very funny because I tried so hard to like get that character from Victorious out of my head, because that's all I can see when I saw him, which is bad. But anyways, I digress. So Eden is now in the cabin, and the general comes in to interrogate her, and he's screaming at her saying, "What is your name?" And she's not saying anything. And then he ends up hitting her, beating her, and then he actually ends up branding her and taking a hot iron rod, putting it on her back. Then she screams out her name is Eden, and then yeah, it's just, you see that toxic behavior where it's like a parent tells a child stop crying after you just beat the child, and then they're crying obviously. That's what he tells Eden, and then says, "I'll come over tomorrow to have some supper, and maybe you can make some chicken." I was like, really? Really, chicken? Like, come on now. Then the film skips to 6 weeks later, and Eden is working in the cotton field. Now, a lot is happening during this time because they see a new arrival of more black people coming onto the plantation, and specifically one is pointed out, who is played by Kiersey Clemens, and I really do love her. She plays this character Julia, who was named Julia because the mistress of the plantation, her daughter, said, "Oh, I want to name her Julia," and you know, in slavery they always thought that people, you know, black people were property, so she thought, I'll just have this grown human as my play doll. Like, okay. And then a weird thing is happening is immediately this like leadership that everybody has bestowed upon Eden, like they're just looking for her to say, okay, when are we gonna escape? Like, what's the plan? What's solely on her shoulders, which I was very confused about. Why isn't everybody contributing to a plan? Julia ends up rushing into Eden's cabin and is very angry, saying, "I heard that you're the one that is gonna help escape." She goes off to say that she's pregnant, and Eden tells her to shut up, to make sure that she keeps her head down, because if they know that she's pregnant, they would kill her. We see more what happens on this plantation. The slaves had put up tents for a dinner, and there's a lot of Confederate soldiers at this dinner. Really all soldiers. Like, this is another thing, I had never seen so many soldiers on just one plantation, which I thought was very different. And then the general goes off to make a huge speech at the dinner, and he goes off to say, like, all the women, the black women who are surrounding them, you know, waiting to get instructed on what to do. He tells the soldiers that these women are your sapphires, that they're here to cater to whatever needs that you have. Two soldiers end up pointing at Julia because one soldier thought that she was cute. Now, I immediately knew that this was going to go far left, because she ends up going to the cabin with him, and she makes the mistake of trying to talk to him like he's a normal person. And yeah, he is normal, but I mean normal minded, because obviously if someone's okay with thinking that you're just a thing to do whatever he feels with, he's not normal. So she tries to talk to him, and then he kind of snaps and says, "What makes you think you could talk to me? I'm like everybody else." And then he proceeds to beat her, and then ends up kicking her in the stomach, where he realizes that he kind of went too far. And the next day, when she's late arriving to the plantation, Jasper looks at her and says, "Well, I'll make this an exception for you being late." But you see the soldier looking at her, feeling a little bit remorseful. I don't think he was that remorseful, but he felt bad that he gave her a black eye. And during this time, when she's about to start doing the work, she starts bleeding, and now we see that she had a miscarriage, and she starts screaming. Eden tries to shut her up, so her screams don't catch the guards' attention, but fails, and she has to go to the cabin to kind of, you know, help aid Julia. Now, one thing I will say is Eli does try to help a lot. Even when the guards were about to go over to Julia, he tried to distract them, and he called Jasper a crocker, actually. And so I realized that he was trying to help protect his friends there. But it really did fail, because he ended up having to go clean out a shed that Jasper told him to clean up. And it's more so of like the crematory. And he sees the ashes of the woman in the beginning with the septum and her necklace. And he starts to scream and cry because they ended up burning her body. It switches to Eden actually being raped by the general in her cabin. And as she goes to sleep, it transforms into her waking up in modern day by her cell phone. She wakes up by the vibrations of her cell phone. This is at like the almost 40-minute mark of the film. So the first half of the film is generally just seeing this plantation, seeing this world that Eden is in, without really any context on how she got there. I mean, we know how slaves got on plantations, but any of her backstory. Now in the second act, it goes to being more so modern day. Eden's character, Janelle Monáe, is now being called Veronica. So Veronica's being waken up by her phone. She's being told that she has to get on a plane. Her professional name is actually Dr. Veronica Henley, and she has a PhD. She's a sociologist. She is a public figure as well, because she's been on the news to talk about racial issues. She's also married and has a daughter. She was watching herself on this news channel debate with this white guy about racial issues, and her daughter goes on to say, "Why is the man so angry?" And she replies, "People are usually angry out of fear." It skips to Veronica on this video call with this woman named Elizabeth. When we see Elizabeth, she looks very familiar. She is the woman who is the mistress on the plantation. Now we're saying, okay, well, is this something where everybody's just doubles, or is there a connection? There's obviously a connection there. This call with Elizabeth is very awkward. Elizabeth has this heavy southern drawl, and she gives a lot of backhanded compliments to Veronica to say how she witnessed Veronica on this panel. She seemed very surprised that she was articulate about a discussion on inclusion, and said how that must have been what she calls a rating bonanza. And Veronica isn't too appealed by that statement, because she cuts right to the chase and asks if Elizabeth has any questions on her book, because she is an author and has this new book out. But it seems as though Elizabeth isn't even interested. Like, she's drawn out from the conversation a lot. She's not even looking at the screen when she's talking. She just seems very disingenuous and gives a very vague answer as to who she is or who she represents. She just says that she's more of a talent scout. And then Veronica says, "Oh, so you're a headhunter." And Elizabeth awkwardly laughs at this a little bit too much. On this call, you can see Veronica's daughter pass by in the back, and Elizabeth sees her and points her out and says, "Oh, is that your daughter Kennedy? She would be a perfect companion for my daughter." So fast forward, Veronica has to go on a flight because she has to speak at a conference in Louisiana. And when she's here, we see her doing yoga. She's being visited by her friend Dawn, who is played by Gabri Sidibe. And I thought Dawn was very funny in this. I love how Gabri portrayed her. And during this present time, we get our first kind of weird event happening where Veronica is in her hotel room, and a person comes and knocks on her door, and she opens it, and it's this white man who looks like a bellhop, but he doesn't give a name. He doesn't have any real emotion on his face. He just hands her flowers and says, "You have a delivery," and then walks away without even really saying anything. It was very emotionless. She is surprised because she didn't expect the flowers, and on the flowers it just said, "Look forward to your homecoming," which was very weird, because it wasn't like looking forward automatically setting us up to know, okay, something bad is about to happen, because it's telling her to be prepared for something. There's a lot of microaggressions that were expressed in this film. So for instance, Veronica is going downstairs to the lobby of her hotel. She's about to go speak to the clerk. She ends up getting surprised by her friend Sarah, who's also speaking at one of the panels there at the conference, and they have a small but I think important conversation in the film. They kind of discuss what Sarah was going to be discussing on her panel, and the big topic was going to be talking about the past. And Veronica states something that her grandmother used to tell her, which was, "Our ancestors haunt our dreams to see themselves forward." And Sarah replies and says, "An unresolved past can certainly wreak havoc on the present." See a lot of foreshadowing of what's going to happen to her. Back to the microaggressions. So as Veronica tries to approach this clerk automatically is cold and shut off. Even when Veronica's about to speak about trying to make a reservation, the clerk interrupts her and just answers the phone, and then seems very irritated that she even has to speak to Veronica. So it was already seeing this prejudice that is being pushed upon her, and she didn't even do anything. All she was asking is to do your job. Like, you're there as a hotel clerk to help the guest, and she's a guest. It also puts back into perspective how, see, Veronica, who's this very wealthy woman and high status woman, but because she is black, she's still having a lot of prejudices put upon her. We see that Elizabeth has snuck her way into Veronica's room. It shines a light on a privileged sense where Elizabeth tells the maid that she left her room in her hotel, and the maid opens up Veronica's door for her. And she just waltzes in and is kind of just snooping around all of her stuff, being very invasive. We see Veronica is speaking at a conference about black women in particular, how they're not seen, how they're not heard, talking about the stereotype of an angry black woman, and how environments have been designed to make them assimilate. And she references a quote by Assata Shakur that says, "The only thing we have to lose is our chains." And then she goes on to say, "We are the future and our time is now." Get into some more microaggressions as Dawn, Veronica, and Sarah are now going out to dinner. Once they go to this restaurant, they see that their seats are to the back, where it's like by the garbage and by where all the dirty pile plates are waiting to be washed. And Dawn immediately snaps at the hostess and says, "You know that this is inappropriate," and demands to be put at another table. And they are, but it's immediately that disrespect that's just thrown at them for no reason. Veronica goes on to say that she's been getting a lot of disrespect from the hotel, and Sarah, who is their white friend, says, "Well, I've been getting impeccable treatment." And then Veronica and Dawn just look at each other like, yeah, well, we can see why. When Veronica is getting ready to go out with Dawn and Sarah beforehand, we see that Elizabeth's daughter, who we first saw at the plantation, she's in her like plantation dress, and she accompanies Veronica in the elevator with her and tells her, "You shouldn't be talking because you'll get in trouble." And then it's like this really creepy thing because she stands at the end of the hallway while Veronica's closing the door, and we see a glimpse of her, and it looks like a scene from The Shining with those twins. And to mention, on the way to dinner, as Veronica's texting her husband Nick about thanking him for the flowers, he goes to say that he didn't send any flowers. So that's just a red flag there, because we know obviously Elizabeth sent them. There's also this weird scene with this one guy who we don't even see his face. He sends a drink over to the table and he tries to hit on Dawn. Something was gonna happen to Dawn too, but nothing happened. It was just this random scene with this guy sending a drink over that had no real context to it. Well, I guess other than him trying to just hit on Dawn. And after dinner, from taking a selfie, they all call their Ubers. Veronica says she's tired, she's gonna go back to her hotel, and Dawn and Sarah are gonna still go out and go dancing. Immediately, what does Veronica do? She doesn't even check. She doesn't even ask them, "Hey, are you my Uber?" Like, she doesn't have her phone out. She's not checking. She just gets into a random black car. They're playing loud hip-hop music. So I'm immediately thinking, did they think that she just wanted to listen to some rap? Like, I'm confused. Telling the person that's driving, because they turn it down, they're not listening. And then she realizes that the driver is Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, who I feel is very insecure, keeps talking about this lipstick, saying, "Have your lipstick," and I realize it fits me just as well. So I'm like, why, sis, why are you competing? No one is saying that you won't look good in this lipstick. Like, who hurt you, sis? I just want to know who really hurt her. Before she realized Elizabeth was driving, she gets a call from her actual Uber driver that says that she's outside the restaurant. Veronica says, "No, I'm already in the car." And then Jasper comes out from behind the seat, attack Veronica, and she's fighting, all while her friend's Uber speeds up and they're laughing and having fun, but you just realize they don't realize their friend's getting kidnapped. Then Jasper knocks her head against the windshield and she falls out. The third act of the film, we're now back on the plantation, the scene where Veronica, who is also Eden, is sleeping next to the general. He awakes by a phone vibration, which is funny because you would have thought on a plantation, if it's slavery, there's no cell service, and there definitely wasn't a cell phone. And he wakes up and goes outside the cabin to answer the phone. He loses his country accent real quick, and he's talking to somebody on the other line about how he's following the rules. So seemingly the plantation is a facility that they're keeping these black people hostage I think it was just a place to live out their own fetishes, because it was very weird. It was a place for these white people to just try and brainwash black people, I guess, back into submission, to be afraid of them. I don't really know. I think it was definitely fetishes. It was just fetishes. They all nasty. They all just weird people. It wakes to morning, and Jasper tells Eden, while she's out on the cotton field, to go wake up Julia, because she's not on the field. She's late again. Eden goes to see her in her cabin. Julia hung herself, and what's interesting is it pans onto a butterfly that was on Julia's ankle, and so we know definitely that this is present time, because they didn't really have tattoos like that designed in the 1600s. Also with that, it's another thing, it was a lot of butterflies. I don't know if it meant like the butterfly effect, but I know that was symbolism for something. I don't know if it was for the butterfly effect. I know that with Veronica's book, she had a butterfly on it. On her laptop when she was about to talk to Elizabeth, there was a butterfly on it. So it was just a lot of symbolism with that. I didn't get that symbolism of the butterfly. If someone wants to explain it to me, I would gladly love to know that. So sound off below in the comments. I would love to know. I do feel like it definitely has to do something with the butterfly effect. But Julia ended up hanging herself, which was very sad. She had a short-lived moment, because it was like we only got a little bit of her backstory. Like, I only knew that she was from North Carolina and she was pregnant, but I know that the miscarriage really traumatized her, and she got hopeless and killed herself, and that was very sad to see. So at this moment, this was a breaking point for Veronica, where she tells Eli that they're gonna leave, like they're going tonight. We go tonight. And at night, her yoga comes into play. She was able to do like a ninja flip over the general, realizing, because earlier in the first act, when Eli first knocked on her door, she was moving very awkwardly towards the door and stepping on specific wood panels. So I realized, okay, maybe that's something for her to sneak out with later on. And that is exactly what that was for. It's for her to step on the quietest parts of the floor so that the general wouldn't wake up. She leaves. First she thinks Eli isn't there and that he's not going to help try to escape. But he does show up, and they take his phone. They end up dropping his phone because two of the young soldiers, especially the one who now we know name is Daniel, he is the one that caused Julia to have a miscarriage. They end up coming across the phone, and we hear them bickering and laughing, talking about, I know the rules not to bring a phone here and whatnot. So we see that people are actually signing up for this, and they're getting off by living this fantasy, and which is much so of like a horror fantasy. But they managed to take down Daniel, getting the phone. It still was a big fight they had to have with the general, because he ends up surprising Veronica. He ends up trying to beat her. They both struggle. The general actually ends up killing Eli during the process, which I was like, dang, he was only here for a second. He's been doing the most trying to escape, but he gets killed. So she was able to kill the general and get his phone, but she had to take his body so she can open it with the face recognition, which I thought was really funny, because it's like not just a thumbprint or, you know, passcode. Now it's the whole face. If the phone is unlocked, she manages to call her husband Nick. First call they made was 911, so what's the point of doing that if you don't know where you are? And when she calls her husband Nick, she did a smart idea, which she dropped a pin for him to figure out where they were so that he could send the authorities to her, because she has been missing for about a month and a half. Like, when it came to like the big finale, it wasn't that thrilling. I mean, I was excited for her to fight Elizabeth. Like, that's the biggest battle I think everybody wanted to see. I did think it was smart how she lured in Jasper and the other soldiers into the crematory and was able to set them on fire so that she can run. But an interesting thing is, she had put the general in a Confederate flag and dragged him into the crematory. Now, before she killed him, he said this is the end, we're everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So he's talking about the people who run the facility, that they probably have many different people who are in control of systems like this, which is interesting to point out, because I could see that being like a sequel. But with the big battle with Elizabeth, you just see how it was actually her father who was a lead person of the facility, And she has a lot of insecurities because she kept saying like black people aren't better than us. She really hated Veronica because her father insisted for Veronica to be a part of the facility. He wanted her so bad, and mainly because she was a public figure. Veronica was jealous about this because she states that he allowed her to pick every single person to come into the facility. But I would say that I liked how it ended because it ends how it started. It started with somebody getting a noose around their neck, and that's exactly the same way Elizabeth ends up dying. Veronica manages to put a noose around her neck and drag her with the horse, and she ends up dying by hitting her head. Veronica is making her escape. She passes by what we think is like real warfare happening. Guns everywhere, bomb explosions. Realizing that after seeing a Robert E. Lee statue, it's actually a real park called Antebellum, Louisiana's premier Civil War reenactment park, owned by Blake Denton, which is Elizabeth's father. It was an actual Civil War reenactment park, but there were signs that said no trespassing because back there, that was actually where people were being held captive. And we just see her rushing into civilization as cop cars are now rushing into the facility. And there's also little clips where there's FBI agents swarming into the park and rescuing the rest of the victims, and then the Antebellum sign is taken down. You know, with the ending, what irritated me about that was, why was Eden the person in charge to help everybody escape? It was like as if nobody else had common sense to try and take a gun, try to, you know, beat up one of the soldiers who are just same as you people, that you could just get a horse and try to run out like Eden did. Like, what she did was go through a lot, and why it was all on her shoulders for them to escape. Like, was it that because Eden was this, you know, philosopher and this author and this well-established and educated woman, that they only saw her as being the only person with a brain? Like, I was really confused. I'm like, the Eli was a professor and he couldn't think of an idea. Gerald Bush mentioned he wanted to really lean into the accuracy of what it was at that time. There are no lashings with the whip. Much of what you are seeing is off screen. It's what we don't show that makes it even more brutal in some ways. We are cognizant and quite vigilant in making sure that none of our violence, not whitewashing what happened. And Bush mentions that. He says that they took some language from Gone with the Wind, and that how they used the word inferior instead of having the white people on the plantation use the word nigger. That was a cop-out, and that was going to get people off ramp in the film. I think it's a very slippery slope in Hollywood when they try to do films that depict slavery in the slightest, because I don't think at all it should be sugar-coated in the slightest. As I said, there's so much more layers to slavery where it's not just about picking cotton, more than monstrous acts occurring during that time. So I always get hesitant on watching anything that Hollywood produces about slavery because it tends to try and sugarcoat it a lot. The overall idea of it, though, is what's scary to me is that I could obviously see stuff like this actually happening. And stuff like this actually happens in general. I mean, there's actual like horror attractions around the world, like some of the scariest haunted houses that people sign up for years just to get money or something. Like, it's stuff like this that can actually occur, which makes it scary. But no, I would not call this a slavery horror film. I think that's very far out from what it is. It deviates way more from the storyline. People took the role of civil rights reenactment a little bit too seriously. Just hated how everybody did not have brains and only looked to Veronica on how to escape. I just thought that was very stupid. I also thought a lot about the Stanford experiment where, you know, if you give somebody a badge and a uniform and they immediately say to you that they're the authority, how people immediately just fall in line and follow them. And that's more so of what I saw happening here. Irritating how Julia just killed herself immediately. I mean, she was probably there for only like 2 weeks. Like, I don't know, I just feel like everybody gave up so quickly. And I just didn't understand that when you fully know that you're not really living in the 1600s. Like, come on now. Ending, I mean, how easy it was for her. I mean, she had to fight through getting to the exit, but just how fast. I mean, this is a scene where the movie where this is the fastest I ever saw the cops come immediately. But again, she was a public figure, so it also comes to think, that's a question to be posed, well, because she's a public figure, is this why people acted on it so quickly? If she had just been an average person, would she have been afforded the same privilege, especially being a dark-skinned black woman? I did enjoy it. I liked the aesthetic of it. I thought it was very beautifully shot. Janelle Monáe snaps. I genuinely loved her acting. I thought everybody did have great chemistry, especially on being implemented, having that comedic relief. It flowed very well. And Elizabeth, Jenna Malone, I thought Jenna Malone did an excellent job as a villain. I feel like she usually plays villainous roles. I know she played in The Hunger Games, and she also played in, oh, I think it was like Neon something, where she played a model that ate people. Like, it was a dark film. Administered that awkward, sinister element to the film that I really did enjoy. To me, it was both similar to Get Out and Us in many ways, where if Us, it failed in that delivery, but with Get Out, I also believed in, you know, Get Out's plot, and I could believe in this plot as well. So let me know your thoughts below about the film. If you watched it, I would love to hear your thoughts. Make sure to give this video a like, and also hit the sub button for more content. Follow me on my social media. The link will be down below, and as always, make sure to have a blessed day. All right, bye.